All right, I'd like to call to order the June 6th meeting of the Cold Spring Zoning Board of Appeals. We've got 2 items on our agenda tonight. We have a review of minutes, which we'll do first, and we have the continuation of the public hearing for application by 21 Parsonage. I'm Aaron Wolf, I'm the chair. We also have Donald McDonald, Grace Lowe, John Martin, and Eric Worth. So why don't we get going with the review of the minutes, and then if the applicants for 21 Parsonage come in, we'll go ahead with that. If not, we'll delay it again. So these are the minutes from 5/16, which I have not read yet.
So I already have a question. More times than motion. I just want to
Your
my shadows here. So anyway, let me just double check that out.
Okay.
To make sure, in fact, I was here, I'm sure I've been second on this.
We're just reviewing some minutes, and then we're going to continue the public hearing. Wasn't that the one where, wasn't that the Derby? That was the one. Okay, this might just be a copy paste. So you were here.
The first bulleted item says the use will be for tools and home project equipment. Weren't they pretty clear if it's going to be a workshop of some kind?
It's going to be a studio.
Studio.
Yeah. I think they did mention yard tools also.
Okay.
But we should change that to a studio.
Used for tool, used as a studio, kind of for storage of tools.
Okay. Did they say no lighting?
Exterior lighting. I think we asked about exterior lighting.
Because I thought they were going to run electricity and.
Right, I
Yeah.
think that was just exterior.
They're definitely running lighting into.
Okay, so no exterior lighting. The only other thing I see is an extra S. John Martin made a motion to grant the applications.
The application.
Workshop for.
So we've got an addition of the word for, in the call to order paragraph.
What do you mean?
Oh, I'm just calling out the changes as I'm finding typos.
Yeah,
There's
there's
nothing
typos.
major.
How's it been with my meeting?
Any other changes? Anybody? Somebody wanna? And John was here. We established that, so we'll scratch that. Okay. That's, looks like just a copy and paste error, not a, being in 2 places at once. Somebody wanna?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as amended, with your, changes here.
Second.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor of approving the minutes for 5:16?
Aye.
Okay, minutes are approved. Okay, so now we can continue with our public hearing for 21 Parsonage. This is an application with several variances requested to construct a home in the place where an existing shed is. I think we're all familiar with the application at this point. The only change recently was amending the application to request a variance for 2 parking spots so that no parking would be required on the lot itself, because the code requires 2 spots for residential in the R1 district. So we have a couple of communications by email, so I will read those into the record, and then we can discuss those. The first one is a letter from Greg and Lynn Miller of 30 Bank Street. Dear Chairman Wolf and ZBA members, we write you today to express our opposition to the proposed variances applied for as part of the development of the property at 21 Parsonage Street. The combination of variances from village code requirements for off-street parking, side and front yard setbacks, and the percentage of lot coverage described in their plan for the property make their proposal a bad fit for our neighborhood. From what we've learned about the owner's intentions for the property, it's not a stretch of the imagination to think their wish is to use this dwelling for short-term transient rentals, i.e. an Airbnb. This type of use in this location does not comply with the spirit or intent of our village code either. Additionally, shoehorning a larger, modern-style structure onto this tiny lot would create a dwelling that would be considerably out of scale and character of the neighborhood where we live. We urge you to reject the variances for which they've applied until they are able to clearly and honestly define their intended use for the building and design a structure that more closely adheres to our village's building codes. I've got some comments about that, but I'll read the next one, letter from the planning board before we go into discussing these. So originally the zoning board had asked the planning board for an informal opinion. They declined once or twice, and now that we have resolved the matter of the so-called merger clause and its non-existence, they have sent us a formal opinion. So I'm going to read that into the record now, as Matt Francisco has requested. He's the planning board chair. Dear Chair and Board, the Planning Board held a workshop with the 21 Parsonage applicant on February 28 as comment on site plan was formally requested by the ZBA that resulted in the scheduling of this meeting. At that time, the Planning Board did not wish to provide formal written recommendation on the site plan because the village attorney's advice was that the village code had a merger clause that had, for purposes of zoning, merged the applicant's tax lot with that of 36 Pine Street. That opinion has now changed, and the village has conceded that no merger can be claimed. As the legislative action of merger and setting aside / vacating of same is no longer in play, the full planning board would like to formally restate the direction provided by the board on a potential proposed site plan for the residential redevelopment of 21 Parsonage Street. Were the ZBA to consider the granting of first, the large area variance, the lot is less than half the required area for an R1 lot, thereby making the lot a buildable lot, the ZBA should be first guided and abide by its mandate to grant the minimum number of variances possible. Given that the applicant wants to build a small home of the same dimensions, approximately 22 by 16 feet, as the shed that will be demolished, this appears to be easily achievable with only an area variance. Though a very sizable area variance that we are concerned is unprecedented. As it is likely the applicant as well as the village would prefer a far lesser front yard than the 25 feet in the code, a variance could/should be provided to be in keeping with neighboring house front yard setbacks, thereby maintaining neighborhood character without compromising a neighborhood parcel setback where transfer of fire, stormwater infiltration, privacy, etc. would be of greatest concern. The planning board's comments at this 2/28 meeting were very straightforward. Make the site plan as conforming as possible, provide the 2 required on-site parking spaces, permeable grass pavers to achieve the desired undeveloped green space look were discussed as one option, in compliance with the statutory parking requirements that all applicants are held to. For safety, the driveway/curb cut should remain adjacent to the northern boundary and neighboring driveway to group the vehicular traffic and parking there, providing a buffer between the pedestrian traffic from 36 Pine to their only parking on Parsonage. In reviewing the video of the 5-2 meeting, the planning board, I think he's talking about the 5-2 zoning board meeting there. The planning board is concerned with the ZBA chair's direction to remove all on-site parking. In response to this, the village attorney advised the ZBA that removing all on-site parking was risky. There was no vote on this. It apparently carried as the application was amended. By promoting the elimination of on-site parking, the ZBA cultivates antagonism between future residents at 21 Parsonage and village parking enforcement. The planning board agrees fully with the village attorney and cautions against the approval of new residential construction without any off-street parking. Doing so further burdens the navigability, vacancy, and potentially even the safety on that street. Further, it adds to the burden on winter parking lots when street parking is prohibited. Finally, this decision could be claimed as precedential in future applications, and if claims were to prevail, it could further compound our very real parking problems here in the village. Parking is a major issue in Cold Spring, and turning a blind eye to that issue here is not in service to the enforcement of our code and the overall quality of life here in the village. Further, it is not in service to the applicant's tenants or future owners to create this situation that would be difficult, if not impossible, to resolve later. The planning board sees no compelling reason to place the new construction residence in the footprint of the existing shed beyond pure aesthetics or personal preference. The shed's current placement for a different use on a now lost/separated 2-lot site plan, as well as the preference of the current neighbors and owner, should not dictate the placement of the new residential structure on this lot. The ZBA should be first guided by the existing code and the mandate of the ZBA. If, as expressed in the 5-2 meeting, the ZBA feels the look of a driveway and vehicles on the lot and everything that comes with a residential development on this application and potential future applications is not in keeping with neighborhood character, quality of life, etc., then maybe the R1 use is simply just not compatible given the existing property orientations/conditions and lot dimensions. Owners and neighbors will change over time, but what remains will be this decision and its effect on the greater good of the overall village. There is a significant precedent, 126 Main most recently, that when a non-conforming structure is demolished, the replacement must be brought up to code and any grandfathering, parking space on Main Street here, etc., is lost. As explained in both the 2/28 meeting as well as the planning board chair's comments at ZBA meetings, maintaining conforming setbacks at the rear and side yard provides the greatest overall safety, and buffering to the neighboring parcels. Further, it best protects the village with respect to potential burden of issues/claims that might present themselves in the future where the extreme side and front yard variance is granted. Respectfully, Village of Cold Spring Planning Board. So I would like to address two or three points in this letter from the planning board. First is that, as the ZBA chair, I did not direct anybody to remove all on-site parking. What we asked for, and the board agreed by consensus, was to allow the applicant to amend the application to request a variance for 2 parking spaces, and we wanted that as an option because of the issue of parking being so close to the house on 36 Pine. We certainly didn't direct anybody to require that. And there was no vote on this, as Matt writes. I checked on this with John First, our village attorney, and his opinion is that a vote was not required, because I wanted to clear up that we did not do anything improper in the way that was handled. We did renotice the meeting, and the board had previously agreed at the very beginning of the public hearing process that the application was ready for a public hearing, and that continued to be the case. The other point I want to make is that the precedent that is being referenced here at 126 Main Street is for the business district, and that was a much larger lot that had plenty of room for parking already. And we did actually grant a small variance for that lot, so they were granted variances so that it fit in. But I think his point is well taken, that when you are rebuilding a building, you have to reapply for variances. Would anybody else like to address that? I think we did finally get the guidance we wanted from the planning board regarding the driveway and the parking problem.
Well, I think he has a point that granting the minimum variances is really what is sought by the code. So we got to be guided by that, and that's what we have to do as a board. So we have to work within that framework.
Could I ask a question? I don't know if anyone here could answer it, but he mentions at some point the owner at on Pine Street, access to parking is only available parking is on Parsonage. I can't find where he makes that point, but it's where he recommends putting the driveway on the north side of the
Right,
lot.
the third bullet point in the bullet paragraph.
Yeah, pedestrian traffic from 36 Pine to their only parking on Parsonage. So is that, do you know what he's referring to? Is it street parking, or is there a driveway behind 36 Pine that feeds onto Parsonage?
I know they don't have a driveway on Parsonage. I'm not sure if there's a curb cut on the other side of their house on Pine. Is anybody?
They
There is-
have a lot on Pine Street on their side of the house where they can park in the winter, but, which is basically their yard. That during the summer and spring and fall, they park on Parsonage Street.
So they're only parking on Parsonage. I don't know if that's totally accurate. Anybody else? Okay, I want to address a couple of points in the letter from Lynn and Greg Miller. First is, we don't have a request for a variance for the percentage of lot coverage, only for the lot area. So that's a minor correction of fact in their letter. Second, it's not actually against the code to have an Airbnb in the R1 district, but a permit is required. And as far as I know, none of the Airbnbs have a permit in Cold Spring. So it's quasi-legal / illegal, depending on your point of view, I suppose.
Well, if someone gets a permit, it's perfectly legal, right? So
Yes.
this board could not disqualify or count against an application, even if the owner attested that he planned to use short-term rentals, we could not count that against the application. I believe, right? So no, it's point one of that letter is not valid. It's not a valid objection.
Right. I think their Their point is they don't want to have an Airbnb in their neighborhood, which is maybe a valid point. As somebody with multiple Airbnbs on my block, I can somewhat agree, but also those are all private, they're privately owned, owner-occupied homes. But it is currently legal with a permit, which nobody has. And that would certainly not be our issue of enforcement on the ZBA. That would be the village board to get the building inspector to do something about it. As far as this comment about shoehorning a larger modern style structure onto this tiny lot, I guess that's a matter of opinion. What's proposed is the same size as the shed that's already there. So I don't, perhaps it's not fair for me to argue with a letter when they are not here, but I do want to point out the inaccuracies in both of these.
Did you, excuse me, did you receive a letter from Tom and Sarah Hubner?
I did not.
He sent one, he wanted it to be ready, asked me tonight, he couldn't come. He lives
Maybe-
in the brick house, 36 Park.
I didn't look in the mailbox as I walked in tonight. Maybe it's sitting in there. And check quickly and read that if it's there.
Check.
Yeah, that'd be great, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, they were at the last meeting when we didn't have this, and I'm surprised that I thought they would have a comment, so it would make sense.
So both of those comments you made with regards to whether they're accurate. And there isn't anything you can do with regards to making a decision on the application of variances based on it. So there you go.
Thank you for bringing that up. We have the letter.
It's this other stuff. These might be the mailing receipts for tonight. I'll look through this.
Okay, so this is a letter from Thomas Huber and Sarah Gerland of 36 Pine Street to Village of Cold Spring Zoning Board of Appeals. We live at 36 Pine Street, that is next door to the property listed above, that's 21 Parsonage. We are writing in regard to the proposed building plans for 21 Parsonage Street and would like this letter read into the record for the next meeting in case we are unable to attend. The current plan for this property strives to keep the footprint and profile of the existing barn so as not to alter the overall look of the property. We truly appreciate the care, consideration, and respect that went into this design and the effort that was made by the owner, Samuel Brogue, to reach out to the neighbors. However, since our initial review of the plans, we have had several weeks to think it over and we have some concerns. We feel that allowing the variances that would make this a buildable property could open a can of worms that would enable additional development on the lot. What if the plans change because of requirements from the Historic Review Board? What if once something is built, the current or future owner, sooner or later, wants to expand the building with additions? There are only a few feet separating our house from this property. Anything that happens there will be right on top of us, including construction, noise, and dirt. It is one thing to look at a barn, but quite another to look at an occupied house and the daily activity that comes along with it. In addition, we all know that the plumbing and infrastructure on this block has its issues, so we worry about tapping a new line into the plumbing and the possible effects it could have on the existing plumbing on the block. We have lived here almost 20 years and have always been told that this particular lot was not buildable. This lot has never been used as a residence. It has always been an unoccupied barn or garage. Thank you for your careful consideration of this matter. Sincerely, Thomas Huber and Sarah Brown. Okay, so at this point, why don't we hear from the applicants if there's anything you would like to add to the record. I don't believe there's anything new, but if there is and you want to address any of these concerns, and then we'll hear from the rest of the public who's here tonight.
Sorry, Luke Hilford on behalf of the applicant Samuel Bro. There's really not a lot new that we need to add to the record. I would, if it suits the board, I'd walk through the 5 factors. If you're comfortable with our position on all those, I don't feel that there's anything new to add. I do want to point out that the plan as proposed, the board is, Mr. Bro has stated to the board repeatedly that he does not intend to use this as an Airbnb. We've talked about allowing deed restrictions. We've talked about deed restrictions for future development that would also address Mr. Huber's concern. It is Sam and Marcella's plan to use the house for their now in-laws since they were married on Saturday. And that, that remains. The concern over Airbnb, as you stated, is an additional permitting process, and certainly would be considered at that point if there was any type of change, and if they used it, if it were to be used without proper permitting, certainly there would be recourse under the code for that. We don't believe there's any undesirable change in the neighborhood. We did have a lot of neighbor support. The Hubers were, Mr. Huber and his wife were at that time in agreement. Obviously their opinion has changed, but generally the support from the neighbors and the community were positive, and that there's not going to create an undesirable change. It's the same footprint. It is the same structure. It will achieve the same open space on the lot. We're not adding any more impervious surfaces. There are other feasible means for achieving this. We do concede to that, to move to limit some of the variances, but those other means were deemed by the applicant, by the community, and it's up for the board's consideration as to whether those other means are a benefit to the community, or if keeping the structure where it is and applying for the extra variances is more desirable. Some of the variances in totality are substantial. They were not self-created. This has been a lot that has been separate for many years. It was achieved by deed. The lot was created in that sense, and there, again, no adverse physical impact to the neighborhood, environmental or physical, as we're keeping the same structure in the same place and not creating any additional impervious surfaces. So I would posit that the board also balances the benefit to the applicant versus any detriment to the community. And I think there is a substantial benefit to the applicant with a somewhat limited detriment to the community. And I think that's really all I wanted to say on the matter. And certainly, if there are other questions the board has for the applicant or for me, we're here for that. If not, I'll sit and let the rest of the comments proceed.
Okay. Anybody have any questions for Luke?
Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else from the public would like to speak? Please state your name and your address, I guess. Thank you.
Donna Namath, 22 Parsonage Street. I kind of was a little bit misunderstood in the beginning when I said that, when they came and spoke to us and we saw the pictures, and, it was going to look like the barn, it was going to be where the barn was. I was okay with that, but then I had time to think. A barn is totally different from a house. It's going to be more traffic, more people, more crowding. And when the woman at the top of the hill had her pipes redone, the process of doing that caused the homeowners across the street's pipes to collapse. And it cost them $10,000 to have their pipes redone, which they hadn't planned on. And it was only done because of them collapsing from the other pipes being done. And there's no way that you can guarantee that that's not going to happen to any one of us on the street. And I know I don't have $10,000 to replace my pipes because they collapsed from them tapping into them. So I am completely against this. And I realize you guys have rights, but that's been my home for 61 years. So I think I have rights too. And I'm sorry, but I am against it completely.
Do you know the name of the name and the address of the house at the top of the hill, the two houses and the people?
It was
there?
Diane Landrew, whose pipes
I
collapsed.
think she's 7.
And is she 7?
I think she's
7 Parsonage. And I don't know the name of the woman who lives across the street.
Anita Desai.
Anita Desai, thank you.
Mhm.
Don't know her address, but she's the big white house that's on the top of the hill.
Okay.
I mean, those sewer pipes and water pipe lines have been there for many, many years. And there's no guarantee that it's not gonna cause any damage to any of the rest of us. So I'm not supporting this.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
Excuse, I have a question.
Sure.
Ma'am, I have a question.
Sure, sorry.
If you take the, and I know it's a big one, but if you take the pipe issue out of the equation.
Well, how are they gonna have a house if they don't have water and sewer?
No, I'm not, let's assume, what I'm trying to get to, is this a plumbing issue, or is this an issue more about inhabiting what
It's
used to
an
be an
issue
unbuildable
about
lot?
all of it, the impact that it's gonna have on our street.
It's not just the plumbing.
No, it's not just that, it's the impact it's gonna have on our street.
Right.
More traffic, more cars, I mean, and more crowding. A barn that's, empty and dark is one thing, a house is completely another. And I realize it's gonna be the same size, but it's still going to be somebody living there, adding extra, impact on our street, and the street's already crowded enough.
Judith Walters, 19 Parsonage.
And I'm Kim Voltage, I'm from Dover.
What was the street address?
19 Parsonage.
Thank you.
Can we speak for it, or can we speak?
Let's speak. I'll
Okay.
speak some.
So I think, my mother's main concern is that we have a variance on our other side of our property for a driveway. We knew the Batanzas that lived in that house. That was a vegetable garden. The 1.5 feet which would be my mother's property line, that's it. To build that house, they would have to have access to my mother's yard. There's no way around that. I don't know how you would get windows, siding, roofing on that house if they weren't in her yard. And that's a big point of my mother.
I have a beautiful yard and I don't want people walking in and out.
The previous owner of the barn would come in the yard constantly without permission.
Leave the gate open.
Leave the gate open, just come and think, because again, you're talking, it's the barn, it's a sumac tree, it's a fence, it's this big, that's all she has. From the fence to her little piece of property and then her driveway. So it's really on her side. And I think that was one of your
My main
concerns.
concern when we bought the house was the idea we have all backyards. It's private and I love the peace and quiet and we thought about it afterwards, it sounded really good. No, I'm not for it.
I mean, it sounds nice. I think the issue is,
Yeah.
again, it's a substandard lot, and unfortunately, these guys are paying the price for when they subdivided the property, and the Batanzas subdivided that property between those two children. It's not enough property to divide it the way it should be for a livable space, and that's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that it was sold the first time, it's unfortunate that it was sold the second time. And, this is the problem that we're making, and I think any decision affects future owners. It's not fair to that future owner that wants to add on, who doesn't know, these guys sell in a few years, they wanna, we wanna put, we need a handicap bathroom downstairs, we need a bedroom or whatever. Now they're stuck, so, I just think it's a bad precedent to make. Yeah.
So,
and add more to the property.
if I could follow up, at the first meeting when you spoke, you said you didn't want the barn to move at all.
I thought when they
correct.
were doing it that we didn't have a choice, okay? That's what I thought. They were gonna do this and we didn't have a choice. He was gonna move there and we didn't have a choice. I don't want it, period.
But the question was, did you want the barn to
The
stay
barn,
where it
oh, I
is, or
love,
you
I
want
love, the
to
barn doesn't bother, the
You're
barn
saying
is a
it's-
barn.
You're saying the structure, would the structure, would it
The
make a difference, the
structure.
structure was
Yeah.
back towards the,
That would
I
make it
think
worse.
I don't think it would make it, I think it would make it worse. I
Or-
mean, there is houses around the corner that, on Pine Street, that I think were there was a store at one time, and then they're right on the street. That's just the way it was, and, you know, that makes sense. But, you know, you have a utility pole in front of that barn. There's a utility pole smack dab in front of the barn, which would
Tree,
have to be
the
moved.
village tree.
Well, the tree, but
tree.
you had a utility
Yeah.
pole right there, and then there is the fact that there's no parking, for them.
And I think you mentioned earlier in the last hearing that if the house was moved back a bit.
I
It
forget
would make it worse.
Or live in my dining room, no thanks.
Or,
I mean,
or
this
they
is
would be
the-
looking at
this would
cars, I
be
mean, they'd be
issues of
looking at their
variances.
driveway, I mean, that's what you're looking at, you're looking at my mother parking her car, you could, wherever the barn, or wherever the structure would be, it's seriously, there's not that much space, it's the driveway, and then there's a little, you know, just about
my
that
driveway.
much garden, and then the fence is right here. You don't have, and if it was going smack dab like where the barn is going back, you really would be, it'd be like the cars on Tom's side, it'd be the same thing. The house would be just as close to my mother's cars as the cars would be parked next to Tom's window. There really isn't, it's not wide enough.
And just don't put your own.
So one of the, we have several options. We can say, no, you can't do any of this. We can say, yes, you can do something, but we're gonna reduce the variances as much as possible and give them permission to put it right in the middle of the lot. Or so we can go from that all the way to building it where it is, so nothing to where it is. So it is possible that, if, let's say we deny this, the current application, and then they come back and say, okay, we wanna put it, we're gonna reduce all the variances as much as possible and apply for something right in the middle of the lot. That is potentially harder for us to,
You still have the issue of the plumbing though.
I'm not for it, period.
okay.
I would just not.
And that barn, I believe is considered historical, it's over 100 years old. So,
No. Why do we have to?
doesn't solve any of the issues of the overcrowding of the street, what's gonna happen to the plumbing and the pipe, you know, water lines and sewer lines. It solves nothing. And putting it in the middle of taking the barn down completely and putting it in the middle of the lot, that would be even worse looking than having it where it is now.
It's in somebody's backyard.
And can.
Yeah, because
I
then
want-
it's in your
Yeah,
backyard,
my
it's in
backyard.
Morgan's backyard,
And
it's
I'll
in
stand
Tom's
up.
backyard.
I feel, Tom couldn't come because he couldn't get here. It's really difficult for him, and I think that you should consider him. It's like you putting a house, somebody's putting a house in your yard. I would have a stroke if somebody put a house in my yard. And I think it's so unfair. It's very unfair.
I mean, we realize it's unfair to
For
them
him,
too,
for him
but.
for buying it, but he,
I don't know how they got to buy it myself. I don't know
No.
how anybody, a real estate agent, I looked it up myself and I laughed because I know the lot, buildable lot, it said, a buildable lot. That's not, who said that's a buildable lot? They sold that like that. I mean, people that know it. I mean, my thing is if there's property left in Cold Spring, there's a reason why there's a lot left in Cold Spring. And if there's a lot left, why is it left? What are the issues with it? And unfortunately, that was really poor marketing on their part, the real estate agent, because all you gotta do is look at the last previous owner. He couldn't do anything with it. He didn't take care of the property.
Would you like to address any of those points?
Yes.
Sure.
I would like to address a couple of points. We did before Sam bought the property, we did meet with the town. We did talk to, it Mr. Phillips about the getting water to the property. We were told at that point that the connection was through Parrott Street. I don't know whether that's accurate or not, based on,
How's it gonna be through Pine
Pine
Street?
we were told at the time that the water and sewer line ran back to behind Parrott Street. That was what was represented to us.
Then you're going through everybody's yard to get to the water and sewer line?
That's correct.
That sounds good.
They told us that that's where that the
You-
sewer line ran down the back of.
You've
No,
got,
no, look,
Let's hear what Luke has to
That's,
say.
Yeah.
that's what we were told. Whether that's accurate or not, I'm not representing whether that's accurate or not. I'm just saying that's what we were told at that time. And that's where that connection would be. So I don't know whether the connection is on Parrott Street or on Parsons Street. You know, that's certainly a question that's left up there. As far as, you know, Mr. Huber having a yard, he certainly had the opportunity at many points to purchase this property and protect his yard if that was his concern. It is a lot. If we reduced all the variances down to the single variance that we would need for the area, I think it's as you stated, very consistent with the rest of the neighborhood. The lot size, it's almost the same size as the Huber's lot. It's larger than some of the other lots in that neighborhood right there. So if we do move the property,
I'm sorry, can you just let him speak? He didn't interrupt you when you were speaking.
you know, in looking at all of the lot sizes, it's not inconsistent with a lot of the rest of the neighborhood. And so it is a possibility that if the board did not allow the variances for side yard, front yard, and some of the others that we're seeking today, and we came back just for the lot area variance, putting the property in the middle as Planning Board Chairman Francisco suggested, putting the structure in the middle as Planning Board Chairman Francisco suggested, it would be, you know, be limiting the number of variances far less substantial and is, you know, something that is, as you stated, a little more difficult for the board to rule on. So
I
those
just
were
want to say one thing, that
Sure.
just to clear something up, because this would have been my question too. The owner of, what's his name, Tom?
Mhm.
He was in contract with his house when the lot, when that went through. He
Okay.
didn't, okay, so the guy bought it for $33,000, and there was, you know, how many years later, offered Tom it for $100.
Okay.
Okay, so he didn't have the opportunity to afford to buy it, which would make sense. I would have bought it too,
Right.
makes sense. She could have bought it, right? I mean, somebody else could
Sure,
have bought it.
sure.
Hal could have bought it, anybody could have bought it to add onto their yard.
Right.
You're absolutely right on that.
Right.
But I think, you know, again, it goes to that lot size. I mean, I know that street pretty well, that doesn't, people's yards are wider, there's driveways, first of all. So right there, you have a driveway, and you have the, whatever feet you meet on the other side. I mean, I'm sure there was variances in the day, people's garages are backed up against property lines that they probably don't do anymore, because that's just the way it was.
Well, yeah, and that's
But,
exactly
you
it. There
know,
weren't
that's,
variances.
exactly. But the thing is, if the barn gets knocked down, it is a substandard structure, then, again, there has to be zoning codes and all that stuff in there, because, again, it's right on top of her property, a foot and a
Right.
half.
No,
You
I-
can't even get your body
I
to a foot and a
don't
half, you know.
disagree with you, and
Put
obviously.
a fence up or whatever, you can't get through there.
Right. And your point too, you know,
Can
they
you
were.
just
Sorry.
address your comments to the board? And
sorry.
he can address his comments to the board, and the board will kind of answer the questions. Thanks.
Yes, and so, and I think just the other point too, you know, if there is construction, where the people would be, you know, that's something temporary, and obviously if the builders trespassed on, you know, the builders would not be allowed to trespass on Mrs. Voltage's property anymore, so.
We back with public comment?
Yep.
Dave Morandi, 15 Academy Street. Well, first of all, I'm kind of, the way this is going right now, it almost seems like there's a threat, a thinly veiled threat, that if you don't give us these variances and have the barn there, that we'll come back and this is what you're gonna get. That's how I'm sitting back here feeling, you know, that's what's just being said. We have the chair of the board saying, you know, that, you know, if it's not there, then we could limit variances, that could go to the center, and I mean, that's possible, but that also feels to me like a threat almost, so I'm a little bit surprised at that. One of the things, just came up, I had a list of other things, but, if you did do that and the variances are there, that would mean demolishing the barn. That's a historic structure, so if you are gonna grant variances, minimal variances, and if they do come back and they want to have variances, to minimize those, one of them would be destroying taking down a historic structure. I'm not sure how the historic board would read that, since there's nothing basically wrong with it. It's a barn, it's what it is. So, everyone should consider that also. A couple of other things were brought up. One was the lot size and how they're similar to the other in the area, or there are a number of them. And looking at what I think Donald put together and showed the number of small lots around there, I don't think that's true at all. I think this is one of the smallest. I think there's another one towards the east a little bit more that's a smaller lot. But if you look up and down Parrott Street or Parsonage Street, they're definitely substantially bigger. I don't know where we're finding the ones that are comparable with it a lot in the area of that size. I just don't think that's true. You could correct me if I'm wrong.
No,
Donald.
there are two. That's the lot that's subject of this hearing, and then right over here, there are two lots that are at least, are no larger than that lot. That's the only thing in the neighborhood.
Exactly.
There's the neighborhood.
And which I'd like to also point out from the map that the area, if you're comparing small lots, most of them are to the west of the traffic light. In that area up there, there are actually substantial size lots, along with most of the lots, I think, are at least double that size. So I'm not sure that argument holds. I think one thing that distinguished, and I brought this up the last meeting, or the last meeting that I attended, part of the public hearing, which distinguishes this property, I think, from all other, like, smaller lots, is that the corner lot, I think it's 36 Pine, is that the brick building on the corner? The brick building, the way most, if you look at any of the others, and I tried to think of ones that were similar to this, and I couldn't find one, is that the backyards, if they're situated like this, are always substantial. Right across the street from there, the house runs parallel with all of the houses on the street, but the backyard is substantial, so it's not, so it's private. It's a sense of, ownership or privacy that you have, where in this situation you don't have. You have this 36 Pine, you have sitting there, and you should have a driveway there, whether or not you're gonna grant a variance or not. There should be a driveway there, and there's no space. So I think you really should consider that. As far as consistency goes, one of the 5 factors, I don't think this is, consistent with what the areas are in that area at all, because of the way it's situated. I don't think there's another house that I can think of, and I was thinking of all the ones in the area that are anywhere near that. Backyards are always more substantial, side yards are smaller, obviously, but I think that's one thing that's taken away from the owner of 36. Saying he should have bought that or not, that's true. Also costs or whatever, I don't think that should be factored in. The parking variance, I think Aaron, you said that you corrected it, you did not direct, or it had to do with the variances for the parking. I don't think the applicant actually asked for that. I thought that was brought up by the board as a possibility.
I believe in the original application they did.
That's
Yeah.
correct. Our original
Yeah.
application was for 2 parking.
But then that was removed, and then there was no variances asked, and then,
It was removed, and then 1 variance was asked. Variance for 1 parking spot was asked, and
So
then.
originally, they were requesting variances for 2 off-street parking spaces, and then I guess based upon the meeting, maybe with the planning board,
That's correct.
initial workshop with the ZBA, then they amended their application to only request a variance for 1 off-street parking space. And then during the course of the public hearing, they had requested again to get, to go for the 2 variances.
so was actually the request from the applicant, or was this brought up by the board? Because it was my understanding that the board brought this up at one of the last meetings.
Yeah, we definitely brought it up. We, when considering the possibility of having a car parked right next to 36 Pines backyard and back door, we wanted to have the option to grant 2 variances to protect the house from having a parking lot right in there outside the back door, with who knows what going on in the driveway, people working on cars, whatever.
So, I mean, is that something that's usually done, that a board that's trying to minimize variances asks for another one in, for the applicant? That just doesn't seem.
I don't think we did anything improper by doing that, did we, John?
No, I think they're just, they were just reinstating the applicant's original request, so.
But they had
And there's no
removed
chance
that.
of them
is that-
granting, or, they still have to decide on whether they want to grant it or not.
Right.
It's one thing to say that.
Is that brought up usually at a meeting? You would think of other variances and point them out to applicants?
When Thomas Huber was here, we asked him if he would rather not have a car parked right outside his door, and he said yes, he would rather not have a car parked right outside the door. So in order for us to achieve that, trying to find a balance between the benefit to the applicant and the benefit to the neighborhood, the board by consensus agreed that we should have the option to grant 2 parking variances. It did not mean we directed anybody to have 2 parking spots.
Okay, I just thought that was unusual. The one thing I would like to say about the parking is like, in the village and as everyone knows, parking is a huge issue. And to grant a variance regardless of what the neighbor thinks, I know you have to take into consideration, but I think you should take into consideration as a whole parking issues that are there. Whether or not they use the parking lot, as the neighbors have said, the other people use their parking lot in the winter or something, I don't understand how you could grant a variance on that. I mean, there should be parking there for at least winter. They can use it as they wish. It doesn't have to be, it can be as it is, it can be gravel, it can be whatever it is. But to grant a variance so you don't have to have parking there at all for now or the future doesn't seem to be a responsible thing to do. I think one of the other things is the hardship that's occurred, and what the ZBA is kind of their purpose is to try to grant applicants to minimize their if they need variances so that their property can be used better or whatever, and that's kind of what your responsibilities are. When somebody purchases a property knowing that there are hardships, there are challenges as been stated by the applicant, I think that should be taken into consideration also. It's not like a person had it and now all of a sudden is restricted from doing what they want. In this case, it's a property that was, it was well understood in advance that there was going to be, hardships with it. So I think that should be taken into consideration. The last thing is, if it's even possible to restore the structure, once you add windows and doors, and I'm sure some siding's going to have to be fixed. I'm not sure what the roof is like on that. I don't know if it's going to have to be moved to put a foundation in. Being in construction my whole life, I think that's it's a tall order to actually to restore this. Not saying it's impossible. Everything is if you have enough money. But I would say that once all that is done, we don't have a barn anymore. And I think that, their initial reaction to the barn coming over the hill was because it's a barn. If you have a house there that has windows on it and it's painted, and it will be painted, whether it's not right now or whatever, it'll be painted or stained, it's not going to be a barn anymore. And I think that's what you lose the character that this is setting and the character in which they fell in love with the barn for. I think that one thing was mentioned about Airbnbs, and that's definitely not your purview. It shouldn't be considered. I mean, if it's permits or whatever, I don't think that is. But I do think when applicants come, you have to take into consideration the future and what might happen. I mean, that has to be somewhat, thought about, because, there is an individual aspect to this. There is a personal, touch to this. There is a person. There's people that want to do something. There's neighbors that want to do something. And when taking all that into consideration, it's like, well, they can represent one thing right now, totally and honestly, and that's what they want to do. But things change, people move, people flip houses, leave, for whatever reason, things happen. And so I think, although it's not really your purview, I think it is considered a lot of times when you guys are looking at applications. And so I think that really should be considered in a way. Maybe it's not the most important, it's not one of the 5 factors, but I think it should be taken into consideration. Thank you for all your time.
Thanks. I would just like to clarify the idea of a threat of a different application. I apologize if that was taken as a threat. It certainly wasn't meant to be. But what I see is that we have an application with an applicant who seems to be willing to work with the neighborhood. And that gives the neighborhood a chance to work with an applicant. It may not be a chance that comes again. So that's not a threat. It's just a suggestion of the range of possibilities that an owner of what can happen with this property when you have an owner who may not care about the neighborhood and one who seems to care about it. So not a threat.
So so if the applicant wants to work with the community for, what he wants there, and they don't agree, then he can do something else, then that's not, well, what is that?
Well, this isn't mediation. We're not the mediation board.
I wouldn't.
They can reapply however many times they want, and they may not get a single thing every time. I think it's also as part of that range of what can happen in this property. I believe they could actually put in plumbing and lighting and rebuild it as essentially an art studio or a workshop without any variances from us. So that is another outcome of them owning the property that, it would still have to go through the building permit and the historic boards, but this is may not be the end of this story for this barn and this owner on this property.
And if there is, I would suggest one more variance, or one more possibility, which is variance is going to be denied, and that you can't do anything there.
No, they don't need any variances to build an art studio there. To frame it, to insulate it, probably build a foundation, put in plumbing. I believe John and I were talking about this, and I believe his opinion was that you can, until you put in a kitchen, it's not a dwelling.
I have a question, if they should do that, wouldn't that essentially make it a commercial property?
I don't think so. But I'm not advocating for any position here. I'm just suggesting that there is a range of what can happen on the lot. I'm not making any threats, just putting information out there.
I would just like to speak to that issue as well. I certainly am advocating for my client's position, but certainly was not making a threat either explicitly or implicitly. It just is the reality of the situation, and that we're here considering all the things that we can do or can't do, but the overriding zoning code is here to promote the best use of the property. And some people may think that a vacant barn is the best use of the property, but I don't know that the code would agree with that. And so there are things that can happen here and things that can be done as of right. And so we certainly are looking to do something that is in conformity with the neighborhood and that addresses all the board's issues. That's where the parking spot came from as well. It was something that's been discussed a lot back and forth, whether there would be one parking spot, no parking spot, 2 parking spots. We've kind of gone through all the iterations and came up with the fact that if we, as the applicant, asked for the most, if we asked for the greatest variance, the board could always come back from that and say, no, 1's required, 2's required, whatever the requirement is. And that's kind of where that all came up. It was a conversation as part of this process. Thank you.
I have one more thing that I would like to give you that we found on a website about New York state laws of building on subpar lots.
Would you like me to read this?
Yes, please.
Okay, so this is from the New York State puts out a technical series of, it's kind of training slash handbook for various local government boards, and this is from that. What must be proven in order to be granted an area variance, which is what is being requested here. And this is only one paragraph of this agreement. If requesting an area variance, that is permission to build in an otherwise restricted portion of the property, such as the required front, side, or rear yards, or above the required building height, or in excess of the lot coverage regulations, then state law requires the applicant to show that the benefit the applicant stands to receive from the variance will outweigh any burden to health, safety, and welfare that may be suffered by the community. State law requires the ZBA to take the following factors into consideration in making its determination, and then these are essentially the 5 factors that we consider when we grant variances that come after that.
So my question is, how can they prove any of that it's not gonna disrupt our neighborhood?
It's not that it won't disrupt, it's that it will the benefit of the applicant, that the benefit the applicant stands to receive outweighs any burden to the neighborhood.
I don't see how it can.
And that's the opinion that the zoning board makes for every variance that we hear, every variance request.
I think another consideration is that the detriment to the community character, the one you're talking about?
It's the introduction to the 5 criteria.
Oh, okay. Whether an undesirable change will be produced in the character of the neighborhood or detriment to nearby properties. I think you also have to consider this is a residential zone. They're proposing a single-family residential home. So, sure, there's going to be an impact. Any type of development has impact, but I guess the question is it a detrimental impact, and is it outside the community character?
Is there any more comment from the public? Okay, so we've got some options as a board. First, we might want to check with the water department to see what they're going to do with the water and to find out what happened at the top of Parsonage, 7 Parsonage, and see if that's a risk that needs to be accounted for. And I don't know that that's even our responsibility to look after that, but we could certainly find out where the pipe is going to go if we want to, or just to get the water department's opinion, or we could not. We could close the public hearing and take a vote tonight. We could keep it open and get this information and continue to review and make a decision at our next meeting. These are all options that we have.
I mean, one thought is, for instance, that the potential hook into, what is it, Parrot Street or Pine Street?
Mhm.
I mean, it goes underneath, across several lots, I would imagine, unless it wraps around the road. I'm not sure.
I wouldn't be surprised if it crossed over several lots, given my experience with the way your sewer system's hooked up.
So that, I think that would potentially go to affecting, the neighborhood adversely.
Well, certainly if, there's environmental considerations is one of the 5 factors to think of, so I don't.
Especially if the pipe goes bad, they don't have, whoever is the occupant doesn't have the money to fix it, but it's fouling neighboring properties.
Right. Yeah, who knows, it could have just been.
I mean, it's speculation, but the
It could have
point
been a
is-
one-time circumstance. I think it's probably worth inquiring with Greg Phillips, what's the situation there? Was it just a one-time thing? What are the potential issues? My guess is it's probably not much, but I think just to feel comfortable and seek confirmation, it's probably worthwhile to reach out to Greg Phillips.
John, can I just ask a question?
If the applicant can add plumbing without any variances, is that something, what could happen if we add plumbing really a factor that needs to be considered as part of this impact to the neighborhood or the environment, or any environmental impact, because, you know, and again, maybe this is an answer we can get from Mr. Phillips, but if it's something that that the applicant can do as of right, then I don't know that it is necessarily part of this balancing test.
Right.
And that's just a question for you.
I guess the argument is he can, you know, they could put a bathroom in the existing garage.
Right.
But, you know, I think having one or 1.5, or maybe even 2 baths in a residential home, you might have more usage. I think they would just have to weigh it, you know, as far as, I think it's worth for them to confirm it, and then you can just consider how much weight you want to put on it, considering the fact that, yeah, they could probably put a garage up with a bathroom anyway. So I think it's one of the balancing factors that they'll have to consider. But your point's taken, that they wouldn't need any variances to put a bathroom in that existing garage or barn. You know, they would need building permits, obviously, but they wouldn't need any variances.
So there would still be a needed hookup, correct?
Correct.
I have to say this concern strikes me as speculative and kind of far-fetched. Can we really, no matter what Greg Phillips says, can we really dictate or predict what eventually a contractor would do to bring in water and sewer there? I mean, Greg Phillips could say one thing, and then we grant a variance on that basis, and then their contractor comes in and does something else. I mean, it's all like so tenuous. This whole point is, I feel like it's kind of a red herring for us when there's so many solid issues involved. I just hate to. it's like
It
going
could have
into
been a
the weeds.
one-time freak accident.
That's
that
hard to believe.
occurred.
Why would there be sewage and water there anyway on that lot? Like, why would there be hookups?
Well, I think the concern is to hook up the lot to the main line. They'd have to hook into the main line.
So there's.
But there's all procedures and rules, so when you have a sewer or water hookup, you've gotta make applications to the sewer and water department. You've got certain, you know, you have to have licensed contractors. You have to meet certain requirements, certain sizes. I mean, there's a whole litany.
I mean, that's
There's a whole
complicated.
process
We
as
can't-
far as hooking up for sewer and water, so. Like I said, I kind of agree with you, it probably is a red herring. But, you know, I leave it up to the board if they want to kind of double check, triple check with the sewer and water department. You know, that's your decision. I think whatever happened in the past may have been a freak accident or a contractor's mistake.
So if we were to look at the variances, and then there are issues separately with plumbing, or, you know, with the water department, that would be the issues at that time, not with regards to what we're gonna do with regards to
Right.
answering the variance issues.
Correct.
I don't think that we should be, I mean, the owner, if they were granted variances, they would pay the fees to have the contractors, the bond contractors to make the hookup to village sewer and village water. They pay property taxes because the village supplies sewer and water. And for us to be getting into that issue, I don't think that's ZBA territory. I agree with Eric, and I wouldn't even worry about the speculation of it. I don't think that's not where ZBA goes. That's handled by the building department, and it's handled by the village of Cold Spring. I think our job is to stay on the 5 criteria when it comes to buffering neighbors and how it affects neighbors in terms of living and the issue of parking and these kind of things, not getting into, I understand very real concerns about plumbing and $10,000 and all the pipes exploding, I totally get that. But that's even, it might be planning board territory. It's certainly, I don't think it's ZBA territory, and I think we're getting into something that we shouldn't be involved with. There's my
Because if it can't be done on a sewer line, you know, through the village, then it just stops there, regardless of what we've done, even whether we granted the variances or denied it. But anyway,
Still open?
yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I agree with both Donald and Eric. I mean, to get into the plumbing and what could possibly happen, I mean, I understand things can happen. Our whole sewer system and water system is 100 years old. Anything can happen. If we tap into that coming into the street, that something could happen with any property on the street or anywhere in the village, and it could impact someone else's. So I agree with Donald. I don't know why you'd even be discussing that or delaying anything, because anything can happen there. It could happen any day. There's people coming all the time that have to repair their lines to their houses in the village. It's not the fault of anyone other than it's, the age of the plumbing or the way it's connected, and we have to deal with that. So as far as the zoning board getting into that or finding out where the sewer lines or water lines are, I'm pretty sure we just tapped in on Pearl Street. There was a whole issue with Nelsonville with the sewer coming down, and that connects on to Pine Street and goes down Pine Street. So I think the sewer line is there, and it either goes up or down. There is, on Parrot Street, it's totally different. It goes behind everyone's yard, and it does come up to Pine Street. But that's not where you'd be connecting on this property. I'm sure you'd be connecting either straight out into Parsonage Street, or it would come out and then go down and connect onto Pine Street. So I don't see that's the read. I don't think that's something you guys should be debating.
Well, the reason we're talking about it is because it came up as a major concern from one of the neighbors.
But I think
So
it could be
whether we
answered, but
decide,
that's not your purview.
whether we decide to pursue it further is what we're discussing. I agree with Eric's point that it's highly speculative, and I would imagine that if we talk to the water department, they're gonna say, that happened way back when, it happens all the time. It happened to my neighbor 2 winters ago, without any construction going on the street, and I don't think there's any way that we can really consider this. But I wanted to give us the option to hear from the water department if we think for some reason that this is going to be a problem. So if anybody would like to argue strongly for that, then we can make that part of the process before the next meeting. Take that as a no.
No, I tend to think that we'll just stick, the building department and the sewer department is gonna just do what they're gonna do. We'll just look at the application as, taking into consideration, the comments made, but I think we just look at the variance issue.
Grace?
Going back and forth on this in my head. I think I agree with everyone that this idea of a potential accident is not something that we should really be concerned about, but it is something that I was thinking would be helpful to sort of paint a complete picture of the environmental and impact on the neighbors. If you're running this line through everyone's yard, that should be part of what we're weighing as part of the 5 factors. That was I think it's probably minor, and it's something that would happen anyway, but I think it paints the whole picture. It's part of the whole picture for us.
In part, because I initially mentioned that point, counsel for the applicant said that from what he had heard,
Right.
that it might have to be hooked in almost a block away.
Right.
And would have to, theoretically go across properties. That was the only reason why I was looking at that a little bit more.
Right, and
If that was true.
we've been talking about the immediate neighbors, and now we're starting to talk about the neighbors to the back too, and I think that's just part of the considerations that we should.
Right, if there was a pipe that was running right out along Parsonage and it just hooked out from the driveway into that, I wouldn't be talking about it. I'd be just thinking about the variances.
Okay.
Can I make a suggestion? If you want, I could go right now, just ask them if it's gonna have to go to other properties, if that would be helpful to.
Would we like to
5
do
minutes.
that? Sure.
I mean, you should know where the lines go and if it's gonna disrupt everyone's
We were just listening to what was represented, that's all.
But I'll go do that if you want.
Sure.
Take me 5 minutes if you want.
If we have a moment, I do have the sign affidavit. I don't know
Oh,
if-
sure.
If the meeting's gonna stay open, then obviously we'll continue and do another one, but that's just.
Why don't we take a break while Dave makes the phone call?
Discuss it as a board.
Right. We can discuss it as a board, and we don't have to take any more of the applicant. And we don't have to decide. We can take 2 months to decide.
That will help. We get a lot of business from people in the area.
So you're happier
Certainly doesn't hurt.
Whether they take it back as opposed.
Most people,
It's a long trip back to the city.
Senior gets it.
we saw a lot of them.
Okay, I'll wait till you get back. Big announcement, it's like the who won the vote or something.
You were having on speaker.
No, I should have thought, I'm not mad at it.
No.
So anyway, I just talked to Greg.
Okay, we're ready to continue?
You ready? Michael, you all right? So anyway, I just talked to Greg. The water and sewer line are both in Parsonage. The sewer, I think, is in the middle of the road, and the water line is along, like 4 feet from the curb. So both lines can be connected directly to it. There's nothing there. He didn't recall the Lentrops issue on the top of the hill, but he said that didn't mean it didn't happen. He just, at the moment, couldn't think of it, so.
Okay, thank you. So I guess I would suggest that that's probably all of the information that we need on that, and we don't have to request any further input from the water department. I think we can probably at this point close the public hearing unless anybody wants to have any more input from the public.
I think I just have a question. Someone's mentioning that the barn was historic, and I feel like we've gone back and forth on this with
We have,
the
yeah.
building. Where did we land on that?
Well, we asked the historic board for their opinion, and they said that they had not seen an application and had not made a decision as to whether it needs to be preserved or could be torn down. So we don't know from them. We don't have an official opinion. Obviously, it's very old.
I just wanted to add something. When my mother went to put a fence on that side property, there's an old wire chicken coop fence. It's a very intricate design.
Mhm.
She had to bring a piece of it before the historic board, because it was historic. She doesn't have, she has the same fence, the poster, the original post fence.
Yeah, you could
I don't
touch
know,
it.
they wouldn't let her touch it. So
Yeah.
I imagine the fence is probably younger than the barn. I mean,
that would be an interesting consideration.
It's still there.
To make in front of the
Whatever
historic
that
review.
wood is, you don't get that wood anymore, it's
Growing.
still there.
It's growing through the tree.
I wanted it actually. I wanted it.
So I think to Grace's question about is it historic or not is something that the historic board would address, and they may say,
But I think it's confirmed that it hasn't been nominated on state or federal lists of historic structures, correct?
Nobody's heard any information on this board.
so they might deny a demolition of it and say, if you're gonna build something, you have to build it right there. But they might not. That's, I think we have to make the decision based on, without any regard to whether it's historic, and if we make the wrong decision that way, then the historic board will say, no, you can't do what you did. I mean, if we said, okay, you can put it in the middle of the lot, and they said, no, you can't, then it would have to come back to us. Other questions for the public or applicants? All right, would somebody like to move to close the public hearing?
I'll move to close the public hearing.
I second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so the public hearing is closed. Thanks, everybody, for sharing your opinions. Do we want to continue to discuss this tonight? Or would we like to pick it up again at our next meeting? I don't want to stay that long tonight. I've got to get home probably by 9:30 at the very latest. But we could start a discussion.
I'm, kind of tired. I don't know if I'm thinking as clearly as I would like to. But I'm happy to start the discussion.
It's fresh in our minds, just doing that.
All right, why don't we start, and if we need more than 9:15, then we'll pick it up at our next meeting. And we are probably not gonna take a vote tonight, I would gather, and then we'll definitely do that at the next meeting. Do we want to have a general discussion, or do we want to get into the criteria right away? How do people feel?
I think it'd be helpful to start going through the criteria. I
Right.
think that would help get a little bit of organized in everyone's head.
Okay. So, there's my handy card. So, can the benefit to the applicant be achieved by other feasible means other than granting the variances that have been requested? Well, if we assume that the benefit is what the applicant is telling us the benefit is, then a big part of that was the appeal of the barn in its present location. Another part of that benefit was having a rental property and a property that could serve as a home for relatives to stay in. That doesn't mean that's what will happen. And a benefit would be to make use of the property as a residential property in a residential district surrounded by other houses. Did I get all the benefits?
Yeah, I think the primary benefit is the applicant seeks to make it a residential livable space. And it's just secondarily working through the location of the barn where it is at the moment. But I think the main objective is to have a residential space. So can it be achieved by other means? If you're looking for the primary thing is a residential space, then I can see it being achieved by other means, meaning working with lesser variances.
So other means at the extreme would be you put it in the middle of the lot, you have a driveway for 2 parking spots, and then we grant the lot size variance. Is that right? I think that would be the minimum variance that we could grant.
Sorry, say that again. Sorry.
They would have to, if they put the house in the middle of the lot, the historic board allows, of course, that's the if for everything that we're doing. Then the only variance needed would be the lot size.
One big variance. That's over 50% reduction in what the code is calling for. Whether it's right or not, that's not our concern really, it's what the code's calling for. And I think we seem to skip over, or the discussion I hear seems to skip over that big variance. And we're talking about you can do this, you can do that. Where I am now is I'm at just reacting to what's in front of me, and I can't go there with that over 50% granting of a variance for lot size. And that's the predication to getting in the game on the whole thing. And I can go through the list. I think that I think it will cause an undesirable change in the neighborhood. I think the request is, no one would deny it's not substantial. I think it may have adverse physical or environmental effects. If nothing else, you're going to be putting cars on the lot. Well, that's difficulty self-created. It sure is. The owner of the lot bought the lot, and I don't see how you could have bought that lot knowing that it was had issues, and it would take a whopping leap of whopping bunch of variances to make it happen. So for me, I can't. I can't. When I start to get into, well, we can move it here, we can do that. I don't think that's our job. I think our job is to look at what's in front of us, and I'm not going to go any further myself than that. And I can't get past the 50%, over 50% reduction in lot size. Over the years, the lot issues that we've had that I've seen, we're talking about like Shay's place, 6 inches. We're talking about, Terry Leahy, he was forced to subdivide to get an apartment, and there was an issue there about the lot width. And that was a matter of, it wasn't more than a foot, it was like a half a foot. And it's, small percentages. This is giant, and I just don't see how we go. I don't see how I could go there. I don't see how I can go there.
Well, I understand I understand your position. I think there's a difference, which is this lot has a building on it already. Did those lots? Shay's lot didn't have a building on it. What about Leahy?
I don't see why having a building on it or not matters at all. In terms of, it's not like it's a habitable dwelling now. It's not like somehow you had some scenario where people were living there and it was an illegal situation. You were making it right.
Right.
It's an old barn. I don't think it. And frankly, in the proposal, it's going to be. There's no way in God's green earth you're gonna build what's proposed and save that structure. Not going to happen. It's going to be in a dumpster, or it's going to be carefully taken down and they'll reuse the parts, but it's going to be a brand new building. But to me, that's irrelevant. The predication to get in this whole thing is, would you grant more than 50% variance on the size of a lot for a building lot for single family residence? I just don't see doing that.
There's a point to that, in the sense that there were 2 other nearby lots not too far away that were substandard, yet they were also built on before the zoning code came into effect now. So you can't really compare this lot to that lot. You can sort of say, well, they're near about the same size, but those other lots were built upon before the zoning code came into effect. Now the zoning code comes into effect, and the purpose is to try to make conformity to what's sought and desired in the zoning code. Now you have a situation where they're looking to build a house on what is a substandard lot. When you take out those other two lots that are nearby that are of the same size or smaller, you take them out of the play because they were built on before the zoning code, you're really looking at a lot of other houses that have properties that are larger. And many, and even lots that weren't necessarily smaller than this lot, that be, you know, may have 500 feet or a few hundred feet more than this on a square footage. They were also built on before the zoning code. So, I mean, the zoning code is now, the way it's written, it's like, we're trying to avoid these substandard lot ideas. I mean, that's the mentality in the writing of the code. And, I mean, do we have to consider everything? Yeah, we do have to still consider everything. But we also have to consider the code and what the purpose was. And I think that this situation here is distinguishable because it's not yet been a buildable lot. You know, at one point it probably was until it was subdivided. And when it was subdivided, I think, was it pre-code or after code?
Pre-code.
Pre-code, so
And not
even
technical.
more. So it was pre-code, it was done, and when it was sort of, you could run with anything and do whatever you want. Now zoning code has come in, and it's put everybody on notice, these are the requirements. So what it does is, I believe, that kind of analysis goes to support a little bit of your thinking, Donald. I mean, in the sense of the lot being very small, and
Well-
a substantial area variance. But go ahead, that's all I have to say.
I think that it's one thing to just look at the code, but we also have to think about the size of the variance in the context of the neighborhood. And there are other small lots, the lot right next to it is small, one across the street is smaller. There are, I think in your study, you found 200 lots that size or smaller in the village. What was it?
Where's the, says it on the sheet? Right there.
There you go.
108 lots smaller, so that's 10% of the village, basically, actually more. So it's not unusual in the village. It's not the smallest lot in that little corner. It's a big variance, but I think the question is whether it's out of context to expect a house on a lot that size in the village and in that small neighborhood. And I don't think that's as clear cut as saying that it's a 50% variance in lot size.
Well, it doesn't mean we still don't have to consider it, as you say, we'll still consider it in the amount of the variance. But at the same time, it's a different time for when the code has come into effect. So we still have to consider it, and the community element is one of 5. Although it has slight interplays on some of the other 5 criteria, it's predominantly 1.
I feel like for discussion purposes, I think Donald's right in saying that there are different tiers of these variances, right? Like we really have to pull them apart and talk about each piece separately before we go on the next one. So I feel like the area variance is like the first one, right? Like if we can go through the balancing with that one, and then if that it seems like we should go to the next tier. The next tier would be like, where does this building actually make sense on the property? And then the parking lots I feel like are like fairly low on the list. But in terms of the area variance, I know one of the concerns has been this comparison to the Marathon property. I think that the difference between those two things is the variance is similar, but in the Marathon property, it's a residential lot. A residence is being put into an industrial lot, and that's sort of going against the intent of the zoning. And I think the other thing that was part of it is that that property owner also had the option of making that lot conform, right? Where in this case, it's a unique lot against other owned properties. So for me, like that separates that particular case out from this particular case.
Actually, what I was surprised when I looked at what I'd done was Marathon didn't even register in that. And what my concern is that there are that many, there are 108 lots that are equal to no bigger than this lot in the village. And I don't know the status of those lots. You know, and when the last time I talked about it, I didn't know whether we were jumping into the shallow end of the pool or the deep end of the pool. And I still don't know because I don't have a good feel for, you know, is this truly a one-off? Or is this gonna come to haunt us in terms of going forward? And I think that, that those open issues, that to me, they're just a lot of question marks. And that's why I kind of got to the idea that it would be, you know, this is perfect world, but that there would be some kind of code, that the code update committee, master plan would you know, have some kind of frame of reference for these tiny lot things, if they, in fact, they were going to be developed. But doing it like this, kind of piecemeal, and, you know, putting conservation easements and this and the other, on the one hand, it might make sense, depending on what the implications were for the whole village, but it also might become a complete nightmare. And I don't have a good feel for what that is. And so before I would think about granting an over 50% reduction in the allowable lot size to have a building lot, I sure want to know kind of what, you know, what the implications were for that. That's what I feel.
Well, now we're talking about precedent and whether we're going to be setting a precedent if we grant these variances. And I think one important distinction about this lot is that there is already a building on it, which reduces the change in the impact to the neighborhood. It's not like taking a vacant lot that's undersized and putting a brand new building on it. Sure, it's going to be a new house, and it's not going to look like a barn. But there's already the physical space of it is already there. And that, I'm imagining, is not the case with other vacant lots that are this small in the village.
I think there's a huge difference between an abandoned barn, an unoccupied structure, which is, you know, it doesn't have any life to it, no activity, to whether it's even if you could renovate the barn into a house, it's going to be a whole nother world when that is occupied, and when that, you know, has life in it, and it has people parking there, and admittedly wonderful people, but it's a completely different situation than an old barn, which, you know, I mean, I don't think that barn's even been used for anything in the last 35 years.
Oh, more than
Right, more than 35. It's like, you know.
The raccoons.
So as far as I'm concerned, it's an empty lot. For all intents and purposes, the village, for the neighbors, it's an empty lot. And what they understood it all to be is one that was, you know, substandard, unbuildable. I guess our village attorney would tell us that nothing is unbuildable. It's just a question of whether how you ask for it. I mean, how you deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, they're allowed to make whatever requests they want for variances, and it's up to this board to weigh the factors.
So,
And every situation is unique.
right. So if I just look, for me personally, just myself, if I just look at this, just don't try to get into moving the thing, whatever. When I look at this as it is, I can't get past that threshold of the lot area variance. That's just me. So, you know, there are 5 other people on the board.
I think it's something that we all sort of wrestle with, right? Like this zoning code is very cookie cutter for a cookie cutter lot, and every single lot in Cold Spring is not a cookie cutter lot. Everything is weirdly shaped and like small and like weird. I don't know. There are all sorts of things that make it really unique and interesting to everyone who lives here. But I think from a zoning perspective, it's kind of hard to sort of put those two things together. But for John, I think you mentioned this, if the intent of the zoning code is to bring things into conformance, into a more cookie cutter sort of state, then it doesn't even really pass that threshold in terms of consideration.
It doesn't mean that we don't consider it, but we consider it the competing things. I mean, you're considering what the intent of the code is, and then you're trying to be objective and looking at the facts of the specific case. And like, for instance, if they were only seeking 35% variance on the area, you know, as opposed to 50%. So that each person would weigh that in their own mind and look at the community and so forth. I was trying to think, I know there are other lots that are small in and around the area, and I was trying to think, well, what's the difference between how they get to be what they were? And it's pretty simple. Pretty much all these things took place before the zoning code came into effect, and they were built upon. They were built upon a small, and in fact, this property was subdivided before the building code came into effect and the zoning code. So, you know, once that happened and the zoning code comes into play, it's simply saying, well, this is really what we intend. So what are the facts that you have? And this is what we wanted, this is what we desired in part. What do you have? And then we weigh it as a board and look at the community at large. So like John said, everything has to be looked at, you know, sort of in that scope.
I think, you know, our job is to grant variances or to deny them. And if we wanted to limit ourselves to what the code asks for, this code that is not appropriate for the village, as is clear every time we get a variance, there aren't actually any lots that conform to that. Maybe the Shays was the last lot that would fit that size in the residential district. So it seems like we want to say that we need to respect the code's desire to bring some conformity for a lot size, but there aren't actually any or that many lots that would actually fit. So
But it's simply saying the intent. The intent is to go forward and try to keep things from being so, you know, like substandard. There's an idea, but then you try to work with what you have, but you keep the idea in mind. So you have something to weigh against. You have something to, you know, try to decide, you know, are we gonna grant the variance or not?
Right.
It gives you a goal, you know, to think about, you know, that's it.
Eric, do you want to?
I'd just like to make one thought. When we think about community character or community context, I think we should not make an overly narrow definition of that concept by just saying there's tiny lots with houses and 2 cars parked in the yard now, so having another one is okay, because that is not the only way to look at community character, just duplicating more of what's already there. Because an unoccupied lot that has no cars on it, because of a historical process that was integral to the evolution of the village, provides community character of its own, which would be destroyed by turning it into the same tiny lot with a house on it. So paradoxically, the exceptional nature of this lot can be seen as a reinforcement of community character. So we should be flexible in conceiving of community character and be sensitive to the fact that there's more than one kind.
Why don't we wrap it up here? unless anybody has any final thoughts on the lot size variance request. All right, so I think what we'll do is pick this up at our next meeting, which is, I'm going to be sure. June 20th, Thursday, 7:30 right here. Okay. Somebody like to move to adjourn?
Move to adjourn the hearing.
I'll second the motion.
All in favor?
Hi.
Aye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.